Some people think the most expensive mistake is buying the wrong piece of land. They're wrong. The most expensive mistake is believing someone else's land belongs to you. At 4:51 that morning, I woke to a sound that didn't belong on a quiet ranch. Metal slammed against metal. Glass cracked across the pasture like frozen branches snapping in winter. Then came the unmistakable bray of my guard donkeys. Loud, sharp, territorial. I pulled on my boots before I even looked out the window. The cold Texas air carried the smell of fresh dirt and new concrete. It mixed with damp grass and the faint scent of hot electronics that had no business being anywhere near my livestock. My flashlight swept across the eastern pasture. Dozens of polished solar lights stretched across the field in perfectly straight rows. They looked like someone had tried to turn my grazing land into the entrance of a luxury subdivision overnight. The polished aluminum reflected the moonlight. Every few seconds, another loud clang echoed through the darkness. One of my donkeys lowered its head and shoved another glowing post sideways. Another spun in circles after catching the strange reflection from a flashing light panel. Within minutes, the neat decorative display had become a field of twisted poles, shattered lenses, cracked plastic housings, and blinking batteries scattered through the grass. Nobody touched those lights except the animals protecting the pasture they had guarded for years. I stood there without saying a word. My phone quietly recorded everything. The security cameras mounted on the old cedar barn captured every angle. I already knew exactly who had done this before sunrise. Linda Brooks never believed property lines applied to her. She believed HOA authority extended as far as her imagination could reach. According to her, my ranch was an eyesore that lowered neighborhood values because drivers entering the subdivision had to look across an open pasture instead of decorative landscaping. Apparently, darkness was now an HOA violation too. So sometime after midnight, while decent people were asleep, contractors entered my land and installed enough commercial solar lighting to make my cattle pasture glow like a shopping center parking lot. They never asked permission. They never knocked on my door. They simply assumed nobody would stop them. They also assumed my guard donkeys would politely admire the decorations. By sunrise, nearly every expensive fixture lay broken across the field. The estimate would eventually climb past $80,000 before anyone finished counting. That sounds like the disaster, doesn't it? It wasn't even the beginning. Those broken lights were only the first domino. What Linda didn't know was that she had just built an unauthorized commercial installation on property connected to something far larger than a simple ranch. She thought she was forcing one stubborn farmer to accept neighborhood improvements. She had actually triggered a legal chain reaction that would swallow her HOA, bankrupt the developer backing her, and leave an entire luxury subdivision wondering how a handful of donkeys destroyed far more than a few solar lights before dawn. I have lived on that ranch for 42 years. Every fence post has a memory attached to it. Every oak tree reminds me of someone in my family who refused to sell when developers came waving checks that looked impressive until you realized what they were really buying. My name is Ethan Walker. I am the fourth generation to work this land. My great-grandfather cleared the first section with horses. My grandfather expanded the pasture after returning from Korea. My father spent 30 years improving the soil instead of chasing quick money. When he handed me the property records, he smiled and said the land was never ours to waste. We were only borrowing it from the next generation. Those words stayed with me longer than anything else he ever said. People driving past my ranch usually see an old red barn. They see weathered fences. They see cattle moving slowly across rolling grass. They assume I am just another rancher trying to hang on while subdivisions keep spreading across central Texas. That assumption has made a lot of people underestimate me. I never rush to correct them. Quiet people hear more than loud ones. My mornings always begin the same way. Coffee. Before sunrise. Feed buckets loaded into the utility vehicle. A slow drive around nearly 600 acres of pasture while the dew still clings to the grass. The smell of cedar and fresh hay has never gotten old. Neither has the sound of cattle grazing before the heat settles in. Then there are the donkeys. Most people laugh when they hear I rely on donkeys instead of expensive electronic security systems out in the pasture. They stop laughing after they spend 5 minutes watching them work. Guard donkeys notice everything. Coyotes, stray dogs, loose livestock, strange vehicles. Anything unfamiliar gets their attention immediately. They are not aggressive animals. They are simply fearless when something unexpected appears inside their territory. That is exactly why I keep them. They protect the herd better than cameras ever could. Cameras only tell you what already happened. The donkeys stop problems before they spread. At least most of the time. My ranch borders Willow Creek Estates. 15 years ago, there was nothing over there except mesquite trees and open fields. Then came bulldozers. Then paved roads. Then rows of identical houses with matching mailboxes and perfectly trimmed lawns. The developers advertised country living with modern convenience. They never mentioned that every backyard overlooked a working cattle ranch complete with dust, animal sounds, tractors, and the smell of livestock after summer rain. It did not bother most families. They waved when we passed each other on the county road. Some even bought fresh beef from us every fall. Then Linda Brooks became president of the Homeowners Association. Everything changed after that. Suddenly, every natural part of ranch life became a complaint waiting to happen. She disliked the fence because it looked rustic. She disliked my equipment because it looked industrial. She disliked the darkness across the pasture because she claimed it created an unwelcoming entrance for visitors driving into the subdivision after sunset. Every month, another certified letter appeared in my mailbox. Every complaint sounded more creative than the last. None of them carried any legal weight. I filed each one inside the same old metal cabinet in my office. I never threw a single page away. My father taught me another lesson that proved just as valuable as hard work. Documentation always outlasts opinions. Linda believed she was fighting an old rancher who would eventually get tired and give in. She had no idea I had spent decades keeping records far more carefully than she kept promises. Linda Brooks had perfected the smile that makes people think everything is under control. It never reached her eyes. Those stayed fixed on whatever she believed should belong to her. She was 53 years old, always dressed like she was on her way to a charity luncheon, always driving a spotless white luxury sport utility vehicle that somehow never collected dust despite living beside ranch country. Around Willow Creek Estates, people described her as dedicated, efficient, passionate about community standards. Around the county permit office, they used different words: persistent, demanding, exhausting. Linda believed every problem could be solved with another rule, another committee, another letter carrying the Homeowners Association logo across the top. She walked through the subdivision with a clipboard almost every evening, measuring grass, photographing fences, counting parked trailers. If a basketball goal stayed in a driveway one day too long, someone received a notice. If holiday decorations remained after the deadline, another letter appeared. She treated every rule like federal law. The strange part was that none of those things happened inside her neighborhood anymore. She had already shaped it into exactly what she wanted. Instead, her attention slowly drifted beyond the entrance stone walls. It drifted toward my ranch. I first realized how obsessed she had become during a county planning meeting nearly a year before the lights appeared. I was there to renew a routine agricultural access permit. Linda stood near a large aerial map hanging on the wall. She pointed directly at my pasture. She spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. That empty field is the first thing visitors see when they enter our subdivision. We should have something more attractive than livestock out there. The planning officer politely reminded her that my property was private agricultural land. She smiled as though she had not heard him. Community appearance affects everyone. She said it with complete confidence. Like repeating the sentence enough times would somehow change ownership records filed generations before she was born. After that meeting, I noticed small things. Survey flags appeared near my fence one afternoon. They disappeared before sunset. A landscaping contractor parked along the county road and took photographs of my pasture from 3 different angles. Someone measured the distance between my fence line and the subdivision entrance using a rolling wheel. Every time I asked what they were doing, I received the same cheerful answer: "We are just gathering information." The smell of fresh printer ink became familiar because certified letters arrived almost every other week. One complained about visual consistency. Another suggested decorative screening vegetation. Another encouraged participation in what Linda called a neighborhood enhancement initiative. I read every page carefully. Then I filed them away beside the others. My attorney laughed when I showed him the growing stack. He tapped the folders with one finger and smiled. "Let her keep writing. Every letter creates another timeline. Every timeline creates another record. She thinks paperwork gives her power. Sometimes paperwork takes it away." I remembered those words while standing in my pasture watching the broken solar fixtures scattered across the grass. Nothing that happened before sunrise surprised me anymore. Linda had spent months convincing herself that if something improved the appearance of the subdivision, it somehow justified crossing property lines. She never imagined that one unnecessary beautification project would become the very evidence that unraveled everything she had spent years building. I reached the far side of the pasture just as the first orange line of sunrise broke across the horizon. Dew clung to my boots. The grass glittered beneath the scattered pieces of shattered solar fixtures. Several contractors were already standing outside the broken fence with coffee cups in their hands. None of them crossed back onto my property. They looked confused more than anything else. One younger man kept staring at the damaged equipment like he was trying to understand how decorative lights had lost a fight with livestock before breakfast. About 15 minutes later, Linda's white sport utility vehicle rolled onto the gravel shoulder. She climbed out wearing pressed khakis and a matching windbreaker with the Homeowners Association logo stitched over the pocket. Her perfume drifted across the cool morning air before she even reached the gate. She stopped when she saw the condition of the installation. Her smile disappeared for exactly 2 seconds. Then it returned even wider than before. "Ethan," she said my name like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Your animals destroyed $80,000 in community improvements. This is extremely unfortunate." I looked across the pasture instead of answering. One donkey wandered quietly back toward the cattle as though nothing unusual had happened. Another sniffed a bent light pole before losing interest completely. They were calm now because the unfamiliar objects no longer stood upright inside their territory. Linda unfolded several sheets of paper from a leather folder. She held them up without stepping through the gate. "According to the Homeowners Association Improvement Agreement, your negligence makes you financially responsible for all damages. You will also receive an assessment covering emergency replacement costs." I almost smiled. Improvement agreement. Those words carried more confidence than legal authority. I asked one simple question. "Who signed permission to enter my property?" She tilted her head slightly. "We acted in the best interest of the community." That was not an answer. I repeated the question. She ignored it again. Instead, she pointed toward the subdivision entrance, barely visible beyond the hill. "Residents deserve an attractive gateway into their neighborhood. Darkness creates a negative first impression. Decorative lighting benefits everyone." I let the silence settle between us. Wind rustled through the cedar trees behind the barn. Somewhere farther down the fence line, a calf called for its mother. Finally, I nodded once. "Is that your final position?" Linda looked almost pleased that I had stopped arguing. "Absolutely," she replied. "We have already approved the invoices. You should expect formal billing within 48 hours. She handed the folder to one of the contractors and turned back toward her vehicle. Before leaving, she glanced over her shoulder with that same polished smile. Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions. The tires crunched across the gravel as she drove away. One contractor remained behind. He looked uncomfortable. After making sure Linda was out of sight, he quietly walked closer to the fence. "Mr. Walker, I thought you should know something. We asked whether permits had been approved before starting. We were told the Homeowners Association owned the easement along this side of the pasture." He looked down at his boots. "They said everything had already been cleared with the county." I thanked him for being honest. He nodded once and returned to his truck. I never blamed the crew. They had simply followed instructions from someone claiming to have authority. Back inside the barn, I poured another cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Then I opened the metal filing cabinet my father had bought more than 30 years earlier. Every certified letter from Linda sat neatly organized by date. Every survey photograph. Every complaint. Every envelope. I placed the newest documents beside the older ones. Then I opened a different drawer. This one contained maps, easement agreements, utility records, original surveys, documents most people would consider painfully boring. I knew better. Somewhere inside those faded pages was a signature that Linda had never bothered to look for. She believed this story was about broken lights. I knew it had just become a story about something far more expensive. I spent the rest of that morning doing exactly what Linda expected me to do. I called the county sheriff's office and reported the unauthorized entry. A deputy arrived just after 10 o'clock. He walked the fence line, took photographs, measured the location of the damaged fixtures. Then he gave me the answer I already suspected. This appeared to be a civil matter unless someone wanted to pursue trespassing charges through the courts. I thanked him for his time. I never argued. There was no reason to. By lunchtime, I met with my attorney in town. He listened without interrupting while I laid the photographs across his conference table. The room smelled like old books and fresh coffee. He adjusted his glasses and slowly flipped through every picture. Then he read Linda's notice demanding reimbursement. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Ethan, we can absolutely sue them for unauthorized entry and property damage. But it will take months. Maybe longer if the homeowners association decides to fight every motion. I asked him one question. If we file today, can they continue claiming authority over my pasture while the case moves through court? He nodded once. They probably will. They might even approve more projects before a judge ever hears the case. I gathered my papers and thanked him. He looked surprised that I was leaving so quickly. Most clients wanted to fight immediately. I wanted something different. On the drive home, I passed the subdivision entrance. Workers had already placed orange safety cones around the broken lighting area. Residents stood nearby pointing toward my pasture. Some looked annoyed. Others looked curious. Linda stood in the middle of the group, holding another stack of papers. She noticed my truck, but never waved. That afternoon, a certified envelope arrived exactly as promised. The Homeowners Association demanded payment for damaged equipment, emergency labor, cleanup expenses, administrative costs. The total exceeded $96,000 after fees were added. The final page warned that failure to pay could result in legal action and additional assessments. I quietly placed the notice inside my filing cabinet beside every other letter Linda had ever mailed. My neighbor Bill stopped by before sunset. He had owned the ranch east of mine for nearly 30 years. He leaned against the porch rail and shook his head after hearing the whole story. You are going to bury them in court, aren't you? I surprised him by smiling. Not yet. Bill laughed because he thought I was joking. I was not. Sometimes the biggest mistake people make is believing the first battle is the important one. Linda believed she had already won because I was not shouting. I was not standing outside the Homeowners Association office with protest signs. I was not flooding social media with angry posts. Silence has a strange way of making impatient people overconfident. They begin taking bigger risks because they mistake patience for weakness. That evening, I watched every security camera recording from beginning to end. The contractors arrived just after midnight. They unloaded equipment, dug holes, mixed concrete, installed commercial-grade lighting. One truck carried the logo of a regional electrical contractor. Another displayed the name of a landscaping company. Every vehicle license plate appeared clearly under infrared cameras. Every worker wore company uniforms. Every timestamp matched perfectly. The final truck pulled away at 3:42 in the morning. Less than 90 minutes later, the donkeys encountered the unfamiliar objects inside their pasture. I copied every video file onto 3 separate hard drives. Then I opened a weathered binder that had not left my office in years. Across the front, my father had written 2 words with a black marker. Property records. Inside were documents older than I was. Survey maps, boundary agreements, easement diagrams, handwritten notes from attorneys long retired. I slowly turned each page until one folded document slipped onto my desk. The yellow paper carried an original county seal from decades ago. I stared at the signature in the lower corner for several seconds. Then I smiled for the first time since sunrise because I finally remembered exactly why my father insisted this single document should never leave the ranch. I unfolded the document carefully because paper that old deserves respect. The edges had turned dark with age. The county seal had faded. The ink looked lighter than modern printing. The signature at the bottom belonged to my grandfather. The date read 1978. Most people would have seen an old easement agreement. I saw. The reason my family had never worried when subdivisions started surrounding us. My grandfather had not simply granted an access easement decades ago. He had negotiated something far more valuable. Every utility corridor crossing the southern edge of our ranch remained under a perpetual private infrastructure agreement owned by Walker Agricultural Holdings. That company sounded impressive. The truth was much simpler. My family had created it years ago because attorneys insisted the utility assets should be managed separately from the ranch itself. My father became president after my grandfather retired. When he passed away, everything transferred to me. I rarely talked about it because there was never a reason. The company maintained irrigation corridors, drainage infrastructure, underground service crossings, at least utility access to neighboring developments. It was boring work, quiet work, the kind of business nobody notices until somebody ignores the contract. I spread the original survey beside the recent aerial photographs. Every solar light stood directly inside the protected corridor. Not beside it, not close to it, directly on top of it. I measured twice, just to be certain. Then I checked the digital county mapping system. The coordinates matched perfectly. Linda had unknowingly approved a permanent commercial installation inside a restricted infrastructure corridor governed by agreements older than her subdivision itself. I called the county surveyor instead of my attorney. He answered on the second ring because we had known each other for years. I asked one question. Would you mind verifying a utility corridor boundary for me? He arrived before noon carrying a bright orange field case and a satellite receiver. We walked the pasture together in complete silence while he collected measurements. The breeze carried the smell of fresh cedar after a brief shower. Birds settled back onto the fence as if nothing unusual had happened. 20 minutes later, he lowered the equipment and looked at me with raised eyebrows. Ethan, every one of those foundations sits inside the protected easement. Whoever approved this project made a serious mistake. I thanked him and requested a certified survey report. He nodded without hesitation. By late afternoon, the report was already waiting in my electronic mailbox. I printed 3 copies. One stayed in my office. One went into a sealed envelope. The third rested beside the original agreement on my desk. Then I made another phone call, this time to the regional electrical contractor whose logo appeared on the installation trucks. The project manager sounded confident until I asked for the permit number associated with the work performed on my property. Silence filled the line for several seconds. He finally admitted they had relied on authorization provided by the homeowners association. I politely informed him that the installation had been placed inside a privately controlled utility corridor without my approval. His tone changed immediately. He asked if I would send supporting documentation. I told him it was already on its way. That evening, I watched another certified envelope disappear into the overnight courier bin. Inside were copies of the original easement agreement, the certified survey, the camera still photographs, the contractor vehicle records. I did not threaten anyone. I did not demand money. I simply notified every party that unauthorized commercial construction had occurred inside protected infrastructure property. Linda believed she had cornered one stubborn rancher with an invoice. She still had no idea she had accidentally involved utility contracts, commercial insurance, engineering compliance, and corporate agreements worth far more than every house in her subdivision combined. The first response arrived less than 24 hours later. It did not come from Linda. It came from the electrical contractor. Their attorney requested an immediate meeting. The message was polite, professional, urgent. That single word told me everything I needed to know. Someone inside their legal department had finally read the easement agreement instead of trusting the homeowners association paperwork. I agreed to meet the following morning. Their office overlooked a busy highway filled with delivery trucks and construction traffic. Inside the conference room, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with printer toner and polished wood. 3 people waited at the table. The company owner, their attorney, their insurance representative. Nobody smiled. The owner spoke first. Mr. Walker, we were assured every permit had been secured before installation. I slid the certified survey across the table. Then I placed copies of the original infrastructure agreement beside it. Nobody interrupted while they read. The insurance representative quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. The attorney flipped directly to the section describing unauthorized construction inside protected utility corridors. He stopped reading and slowly looked up at me. Did the Homeowners Association ever obtain written authorization from Walker Agricultural Holdings? I answered with one word. No. Silence settled over the room for several long seconds. Finally, the owner sighed. We have a serious problem. I shook my head gently. No, you have a serious problem. I simply own the land. By noon, the contractor voluntarily suspended every remaining improvement project scheduled for Willow Creek Estates. They also informed the Homeowners Association that no additional work would continue until ownership questions were resolved. Linda responded exactly as I expected. She sent another certified letter accusing me of interfering with community development. She claimed I was intentionally creating delays that would increase project costs. I filed that letter beside the others without replying. Later that afternoon, my telephone rang again. This time it was the engineering firm that had designed the lighting layout. One of their project managers sounded nervous. He asked whether I would confirm the exact corridor boundaries before they prepared a revised report for their insurance carrier. I agreed. Within hours, another survey crew walked the pasture. They reached the same conclusion as the county surveyor. Every foundation had been placed inside restricted infrastructure property. The dominoes had started falling. None of them could be pushed back upright. 2 days later, I drove past the subdivision entrance and noticed something different. The orange construction equipment had disappeared. Temporary fencing surrounded the damaged installation site. Residents gathered in small groups instead of admiring new landscaping. Even from the road, I could see Linda speaking rapidly into her phone while pointing toward my pasture. She looked frustrated for the first time since this whole mess began. She was still trying to convince everyone the issue was about decorative lights. It had not been about lights for several days. That evening, another overnight courier stopped at my ranch. Inside the envelope was a formal notice from the contractor's insurance carrier. They acknowledged receipt of my documentation and confirmed they had opened a commercial liability investigation involving unauthorized construction activities. I placed that letter into the filing cabinet with the others. My father used to say that facts move quietly while lies run out of breath. Watching this unfold reminded me exactly what he meant. I had never demanded revenge. I had never threatened anyone. I had simply allowed every signature, every survey, every photograph, every contract, and every official record to find the next person responsible. Linda still believed she was fighting one rancher across a fence line. She had not realized she was now standing in the middle of a legal chain reaction that no homeowners association vote could ever stop. The county hearing took place 2 weeks later in a plain government building that smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. I arrived carrying one weathered leather binder. Linda arrived with 3 board members, 2 attorneys, a consultant, and enough printed exhibits to fill an entire rolling cart. She looked confident walking into the room. She looked like someone who still believed the argument centered on decorative improvements and damaged equipment. The hearing officer asked a simple opening question. Who authorized commercial construction inside the protected corridor? Linda immediately began describing neighborhood beautification goals, property values, community safety, improved nighttime visibility. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes without mentioning a single signed authorization. When she finally finished, the hearing officer turned toward me. Mr. Walker, do you have documentation regarding ownership and access rights? I quietly slid the original easement agreement across the table. Then I added the certified survey, the contractor correspondence, the insurance acknowledgement, and the county mapping records. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody interrupted. Page after page told the story more clearly than any speech ever could. The hearing officer read every signature in complete silence. One of Linda's attorneys leaned closer to examine the survey. His expression changed almost immediately. He whispered something to his client. She shook her head before he even finished speaking. Then the engineering report appeared on the projector screen. Every light foundation sat inside the restricted infrastructure corridor. Every measurement matched the county records within inches. The room became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming above us. The hearing officer closed the final folder and looked directly at the homeowners association representatives. Based on the documentation presented today, this office finds no evidence that the homeowners association possessed legal authority to approve construction within the protected corridor. Any work performed there appears to have been unauthorized. Those words landed harder than any argument could have. Within days, the contractor formally withdrew from every remaining subdivision improvement project. Their insurance carrier reserved its rights under the policy while reviewing potential liability. The engineering firm issued a notice distancing itself from the authorization process. The developer financing the entrance renovation announced a temporary suspension pending legal review. Banks do not enjoy uncertainty. Investors dislike it even more. Purchase agreements slowed almost overnight. Planned model home expansions quietly disappeared from public announcements. None of those decisions came from me. They came from companies protecting themselves after reading the same documents Linda had ignored. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting the following week. Residents packed the clubhouse. Some wanted Answers about rising legal expenses. Others wanted to know why assessments were increasing again. Several homeowners questioned why a project that began with decorative lighting had suddenly involved engineers, insurance carriers, utility agreements, and county officials. Linda tried to reassure everyone that the matter would soon be resolved. Then another certified letter arrived during the meeting. The contractor sought indemnification from the Homeowners Association under their construction agreement. The room fell silent as board members read the notice. The financial exposure suddenly became real. It was no longer about replacing broken fixtures. It was about legal fees, contract obligations, insurance disputes, delayed development, and responsibilities nobody had expected to inherit. I drove home before sunset and turned onto the familiar gravel road leading back to the ranch. The donkeys grazed quietly beside the cattle as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The cedar trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. The pasture looked exactly as it had before anyone decided it needed to be improved. Standing there, I realized the greatest irony of the entire situation. The only thing my animals had actually broken was a row of unauthorized lights. Every larger consequence had been created by paperwork, signatures, contracts, and decisions made long before sunrise by people who believed ownership was just another opinion. 3 months later, the pasture looked exactly the way it always had. Morning fog still drifted across the grass before sunrise. The cattle still wandered toward the watering trough without anyone telling them where to go. The donkeys still made their slow patrol around the herd every evening as if they were carrying out a job nobody had officially assigned them. The only thing missing was the row of decorative lights that had never belonged there in the first place. Willow Creek Estates looked different too. The unfinished entrance project remained fenced off behind temporary barriers. Construction signs had quietly disappeared. Residents eventually learned that the Homeowners Association had agreed to a confidential settlement with several contractors after months of insurance negotiations and legal review. Public meeting minutes confirmed that the board approved a substantial special assessment to cover mounting legal expenses. Linda Brooks resigned before the next election cycle. Her resignation letter spoke about personal reasons and the desire to spend more time with family. It never mentioned the surveys, the contracts, the unauthorized construction, or the documents that had started everything. The new board president visited my ranch one Saturday morning carrying nothing but a clipboard and a handshake. He apologized for everything that had happened. He admitted that the previous board had confused community preference with property rights. We stood beside the old cedar fence while the breeze carried the smell of fresh hay across the pasture. I accepted his apology because holding a grudge never repaired a fence or improved a neighborhood. Before leaving, he asked one question that made me smile. Why did you stay so calm through all of this? I looked across the same field my family had protected for generations. My grandfather used to say that land has a longer memory than people. If you know your boundaries and keep your record straight, time usually does the arguing for you. He nodded slowly as though those words answered far more than his question. After he left, I walked back to the barn and opened the old filing cabinet one last time. The folders that had grown thicker with every complaint now held the final settlement notices beside the original easement agreement. I closed the drawer without throwing a single document away. Someday another generation of walkers might need them. My father believed records were part of the inheritance just as much as the land itself. Looking back now, people often ask whether the donkeys really caused all those financial losses. The honest answer is no. They only reacted the way any well-trained guard animals would react when unfamiliar objects suddenly appeared inside their protected pasture. The real damage came from assumptions. Someone assumed ownership without verifying it. Someone approved construction without reading old agreements. Someone believed confidence could replace permission. That was the most expensive mistake of all. Every major consequence that followed came from signatures already sitting inside county archives long before the first contractor unloaded a single solar light. I never demanded revenge. I never raised my voice. I never needed to. The law already knew where the property line stood. It simply took a little patience for everyone else to notice it too. Every morning, I still drive the same gravel road with a cup of coffee resting beside me. The sunrise still paints the pasture gold. The donkeys still stop and watch every unfamiliar truck that slows near the fence. They have no idea people tell stories about them now. They are simply doing what they have always done. protecting the herd, protecting the pasture, and reminding anyone willing to pay attention that real justice rarely arrives with shouting. It arrives quietly, one document at a time, because justice is never the loudest voice in the room. It is the last signature on the final page.